What happens when the CEO of a luxury valet service trades his suit for a red vest and finds out his supervisor is joyriding in customer cars? Darren O'Neil stood in the corner of his office, staring at the spreadsheet. The numbers looked fine on paper, but something didn't sit right. The seventh location, a high-end hotel valet in downtown Houston, had nearly doubled its incident reports in the last 3 months. Minor scrapes, odd guest complaints, a few whispered concerns from the district manager that the staff's getting a little loose. Darren had bought the valet business 6 years ago when it only had 3 locations. He'd grown it to 7, each tied to luxury hotels or restaurants. But lately he'd felt distance creeping in. He used to know everyone's name. Now he barely recognized the names on the payroll list. He closed his laptop and exhaled. Time to see it for myself. The Houston location had a staff of 12, including 1 supervisor. It was a busy spot, known for high-end clientele celebrities, athletes, and executives. The kind of place where one mistake could cost more than a year's salary. Darren couldn't just walk in as the owner. Most of this crew had never met him, and none had seen him outside of a newsletter photo from years ago. He shaved his beard, dyed his gray streaks, added glasses, and wore a fake scar on his cheek. A friend in makeup owed him a favor. He arrived that Friday under the name Doug, claiming to be a new trainee sent from corporate. The manager on duty, a guy named Carlos, barely looked up from his phone. "You're late," Carlos muttered, handing him a red vest. "Just follow Mason." "Don't mess anything up." Mason, a soft-spoken guy in his late 20s, gave a quick nod. "You ever parked a Bentley before?" Darren grinned. "Guess I'll learn today." The lot was chaos. Cars rolled in nonstop. Mason handled most of them calmly, always jogging back with keys, always smiling at guests even when they ignored him by 3 p.m. Darren's back ached. "You get used to it," Mason said, handing him a water bottle. "Carlos hasn't moved from that chair since noon." Darren glanced over. Carlos was still there, scrolling through his phone, occasionally barking orders. "Is it always like this?" Short 2 guys. "One quit last week," said Carlos, cursed him out. Another called in sick. "Happens more than it should." Darren watched as a silver Porsche 911 pulled up. A young man in sunglasses tossed the keys to Carlos. "Don't scratch her, man," the driver laughed. Carlos stood up, stretched, and winked at Mason. "I got this one." Mason hesitated, then leaned toward Darren. "He always takes the fancy ones. Says it's for security reasons." Carlos slid into the Porsche and didn't pull into a spot. He drove straight out of the lot. Darren's jaw clenched. "That normal?" "Depends on your definition of normal," Mason muttered. Over the next 30 minutes, Darren helped park 7 more cars. Still no Carlos. When Carlos finally returned, he stepped out of the Porsche with a cold drink and a smug look. "Had to run it around the block. Engine was making a weird noise." Mason whispered. "He says that about every sports car." Darren kept his cool. He needed more. The shift ended after sunset. Darren helped Mason stack cones. "You like working here?" Darren asked. Mason nodded slowly. "I do. I like the guests. I like the cars. Just wish we had better leadership. Carlos, he's not the worst, but sometimes he's reckless. He took a Lambo last week for 10 minutes. Guest noticed the mileage." Darren stared at him. "What happened?" "Carlos blamed me, said I parked it. I almost got written up." That night, Darren sat in his hotel room staring at the ceiling. He felt sick. This wasn't a one-off. Carlos was abusing his position. And worse, he was putting the entire business at risk. Darren had built this company with pride. He used to be the guy who'd run across the lot in summer heat just to open a car door for a nervous bride. Now his name was attached to someone who treated customer property like a toy. He had to go back tomorrow. And this time, he'd keep his eyes on Carlos the whole day. The next morning, Darren arrived early, half an hour before the shift started. The valet stand was still closed, but Mason was already there, leaning against the small supply shed with a paper bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. "You're early," Mason said. "That's rare around here." Darren gave a subtle shrug. Wanted to see what it's like before the rush. Mason handed him a donut from the bag without asking. You might regret that when your legs start giving up around 2. By 7, the first wave of guests started pulling into the circular drive. Most were business travelers, some dressed sharp, others clearly exhausted from red-eyes. Darren parked a Lexus while Mason handled a Range Rover with a family inside. Neither of them saw Carlos arrive. 10 minutes later, Carlos strolled across the pavement, sunglasses on, chewing gum. He didn't greet anyone, just walked straight to the podium, unlocked it, and pulled out the key box with a yawn. "You two start without me," he said, not looking at either of them. "We've been here since before 6:30, Mason said, tossing him a key tag. Carlos snorted and flipped open the reservation clipboard. "Corporate's got a new guy coming in today anyway, some kind of check-in or whatever. Big shot, don't screw anything up." Darren kept his face still. No one from corporate was coming except him. The morning rush built steadily. By 8:15, the drive was nearly full. Darren stayed in constant motion, running 3 blocks to the overflow lot and back more times than he could count. Mason kept up, though it was clear his right knee was bothering him. Darren noticed the subtle limp after the 5th trip. "You all right?" Darren asked as they waited for another vehicle. "Old soccer injury. It flares up when I'm on my feet too long, but no one really cares, so I work through it." Darren didn't respond, but his mind was racing. If Mason was injured and still outperforming the rest, what did that say about the environment? At 9, a black Escalade pulled in. A middle-aged woman stepped out, clearly flustered, digging through her purse. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Please make sure this doesn't get parked in the sun." "My dog's crate is in the back and I've got the AC running." Carlos approached her with exaggerated calm. "Ma'am, this is a professional service. We don't park cars in the sun unless you ask us to. You're fine." She hesitated. "Okay. I'm trusting you." As she disappeared inside the hotel, Carlos tossed the keys to Darren. "Take it across the street. Leave it where you can." Darren blinked. She asked for shade. "It's already cooled down inside. There are covered spots in the garage." Carlos tapped his watch. "We don't have time for special requests. Just park it." Darren didn't move. Mason stepped in quickly. "I'll take it. I know where the covered spots are." Carlos didn't say anything, just turned away. That moment told Darren more than any speech could. Carlos didn't care. Not about the guests, not about the staff. It was efficiency over service, attitude over accountability. Later that morning, a delivery van clipped a parked BMW as it backed out. The valet team wasn't at fault. The van driver hadn't checked his mirrors, but Carlos handled the situation like it was beneath him. He barely looked at the damage, muttered something about filing it later, and walked away, leaving Mason to deal with the guest when he returned. "You're the one who parked it?" the guest asked Mason. "No, sir, but I'll help you file a report. We have a process for this." Carlos was nowhere in sight. By noon, the heat was brutal. Darren could feel sweat soaking through his undershirt. There was no scheduled lunch break. One of the younger valets, Kevin, leaned against the podium, clearly lightheaded. "You all right?" Darren asked. Kevin shook his head. "Didn't eat, been trying to save up. I'll be fine." Carlos overheard but didn't react. He was too busy texting on his phone. A few minutes later, a Ferrari California pulled in. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a gold watch and open shirt, stepped out and handed the keys directly to Carlos. "I just had this detailed. I mean it if there's even dust on it when I'm back. Someone's paying." Carlos nodded, exaggeratedly solemn. "Trust me, it's in good hands." He got behind the wheel and turned the engine over. Instead of pulling into the valet lot or even the garage, he made a slow turn and headed down the street. Darren watched as the Ferrari disappeared around the corner. Mason stood next to him, jaw tight. "He's not coming back for a while. He does this with the expensive ones. Says he's keeping them safe off-site. Yesterday it was someone's Bentley. Took it to a friend's shop, I think." Darren's stomach turned. This wasn't just about laziness or bad management. This was liability, legal exposure, a betrayal of every guest who trusted them. He looked at Mason. Why hasn't anyone reported it? We've tried, but Carlos has been here 5 years. He knows someone in HR. Last guy who spoke up got his hours cut the next week. Darren nodded once. That was all he needed to hear. By mid-afternoon, Carlos returned, sunglasses pushed up on his head like nothing happened. He handed the keys to Mason. Got her out of the sun. You're welcome. The rest of the shift dragged, the heat unrelenting. When the rush slowed, Darren grabbed 2 cold waters from the supply cooler and handed one to Kevon, who looked like he hadn't had anything in hours. Carlos walked by and scoffed. You babies need breaks now. What is this, kindergarten? Darren stepped forward, voice even. He looked like he was about to pass out. A bottle of water's not too much to ask. Carlos turned, squinting. Who the hell are you to talk about what's too much? Darren held his gaze but said nothing. Not yet. At the end of the shift, Mason pulled off his vest and sat on the curb, rubbing his knee. You ever think about leaving? Darren asked quietly. Every week. But I've got a little girl, and I get just enough hours here to keep rent covered. I'm not in a position to gamble. Darren nodded, then stood. Carlos was in the corner, laughing into his phone. Darren walked over and stopped a few feet away. Carlos. The supervisor looked up, annoyed. What? Darren pulled off his glasses and wiped his face with a towel, revealing his full face for the first time. Carlos blinked. What are you doing? I'm not Doug. My name is Darren O'Neil. I'm the owner of this company. Carlos's mouth opened, but no words came. I've been here for 2 days. I've watched you ignore protocol, endanger vehicles, disrespect staff, and lie to customers. You took someone's Ferrari off-site without authorization. That alone could have cost us everything, Carlos stammered. It's not like that. You're finished. Effective immediately. Carlos stepped forward. You can't just, I can, and I will. And if any of those cars you took off the lot even have a scratch, you'll be hearing from our legal team. Carlos looked around for backup, but no one said a word. Even Kevon stood silently, eyes locked on the ground. Darren turned to Mason. Your lead until further notice. We'll bring in a new supervisor by the end of the week. In the meantime, you call me directly if anything's off. I'll have a corporate rep here tomorrow to start cleaning this up. Mason's eyes widened. You're serious? I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. He turned back to the team. You all deserve better. And starting today, that's what you're going to get. Mason arrived just before sunrise, still limping slightly but walking with more purpose than the day before. He gave Darren a quick nod and began setting up the cones along the curb without a word. The rest of the team trickled in slowly, most of them quiet, watching Darren from the corners of their eyes. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Word had traveled fast. Carlos was gone. Darren stayed behind the desk that morning, not to avoid the work, but to observe how everyone moved without someone barking orders from a folding chair. It was quieter, but the energy was different, less tension, less second-guessing. The younger valets took cues from Mason, who assigned tasks with calm, short instructions. No one dragged their feet. No one looked over their shoulder. At 7:10, Darren spotted a man in a navy blazer walking toward the valet stand, a clipboard under one arm. He looked around the entryway with precise, practiced glances. Connor Callahan, the man said, extending a hand. Regional Compliance and Ops. You called last night. Darren shook his hand. Yeah, I want every ticket from the last 90 days pulled and reviewed. Especially anything with a high-value vehicle. Cross-check mileage in and out. If there's anything that doesn't add up, I want a report on my desk by this evening. Connor nodded once. Understood. I'll also speak with the hotel's security director. Their cameras cover the drive and the exits. If anything left the property unauthorized, it'll be on video. Good. And while you're at it, interview each staff member privately. I want to know who's been covering for Carlos and who's been stuck cleaning up after him. Mason approached as Connor walked off. We're gonna get audited, he asked. Not you, just the record trail Carlos left behind. He hesitated. You think they're gonna find more? I don't think, Darren said. I know. By mid-morning, the drive was full again. Darren could feel the strain picking up. Mason jogged back from the overflow lot and handed off a key ring to Kevon, who looked more alert than the day before but still moved a little slow. Darren noticed his shirt was looser today and his belt was cinched tighter than it needed to be. He made a mental note. "Kevon," Darren called, "you eaten anything yet today? Had a granola bar earlier. Take 15. Grab something real, I'll cover your side." Kevon blinked, surprised, then nodded and jogged toward the break room in the basement behind the hotel. One of the other valets, a woman named Sienna, walked up with a receipt pad. "That guy in the Jag wants his car brought to the front in 5, says he's in a hurry." Mason took the stub. "I parked it across the street, I'll go get it." "No," Darren said, "you're limping worse than this morning." "Give me the stub." "I'm fine," Mason protested. "I'm not asking." Darren crossed the street and located the Jaguar, tucked carefully between a Tesla and a Chrysler. As he eased it into gear, he noticed a crumpled napkin wedged between the seat and console. It was marked with a red smear lipstick, maybe, and had a phone number scribbled on it. Darren frowned. This car had only been here 2 hours. He checked the mileage. It matched the ticket. Still, the napkin felt off. He made a mental note and pulled forward. The guest, a sharply dressed man in his 50s, tapped his watch impatiently as Darren stepped out. "Took long enough." "I apologize for the wait," Darren said. "We had to retrieve it from a secured lot." The guest snatched the keys and got in without another word. As Darren turned back toward the stand, he saw Connor returning from the hotel's security office, a USB drive in his hand. "You'll want to see this," Connor said. "I've got footage from last Thursday. Carlos took a Rolls-Royce off the property at 11:42 in the morning. Didn't return until nearly 1. Same day there was a mileage discrepancy noted by the guest. Where'd he go? Hard to say. Cameras lose him after the second intersection, but he had a passenger in the front seat." Darren's face hardened. "Who? Not a guest, someone in jeans and a tank top. Could have been a friend, or worse. Pull every day he opened a shift in the last 2 months. I want a list of every car he personally handled." Connor nodded and walked off again. Back at the valet stand, one of the newer guys, Illy, flagged Darren down. "Can I ask something? Go ahead." "You really the guy in charge? Like the top?" "I own the company." Illy looked around, then leaned in a little. "I've only been here 6 weeks. Carlos didn't like me, said I was too slow for a place like this, cut my hours after my first week. I never even knew who to talk to about it." "You're talking to him now," Illy hesitated. "He used to call me cargo boy, said I dressed like I unloaded trucks." Darren's jaw tensed. "He say that in front of others, pretty much every day." When guests weren't around, Darren turned to Sienna, who had just finished parking another car. "You ever hear Carlos say anything like that?" She nodded slowly. "He used to call Illy the warehouse kid, said he looked too rough for luxury, told me once not to schedule him when the important guests were checking in." Darren's voice dropped. "Did he ever say anything to you directly?" Sienna's eyes narrowed. "I'm mixed, white and Filipino. He used to joke that I was our diversity hire, thought it was funny." Darren didn't reply. He walked straight to the back corner of the podium and unlocked the personnel folder box. He pulled out Carlos's file and slid it into his bag, then he turned to Connor, who had just returned. "Add this to the report," Darren said. "Discriminatory behavior, pattern of verbal harassment. If I see even one more story like this from a staff member, I don't want Carlos just fired. I want him blacklisted from every vendor contract we touch." Connor's face was unreadable. "Understood." Darren called everyone together near the end of the shift. "I know the last few days have been a shock. Some of you dealt with more than you ever should have. You're not going to be ignored anymore." Sienna crossed her arms. "What's going to change? We're bringing in new regional leadership. Someone who actually walks the lot. There's going to be a dedicated HR line for every location, and it won't go through middle managers. Starting next week, each of you will have private check-ins with corporate. No more whispering to avoid retaliation." Illy raised a hand. "Are you keeping Mason in charge?" Darren looked at Mason. "Only if he wants it." Mason looked around at the others, Kevon, Sienna, Illy, and back at Darren. I do. But only if I get the authority to back it up. You will, Darren took a breath. And as of today, we're setting up a rotation plan for breaks. No more skipping meals, no more limping through the day. If someone needs to sit, they sit. We'll cover each other. That's how this should have worked from the beginning. No one cheered, no one clapped, but the silence was different now, thicker, steadier. Like the first gust of air after a door's been sealed too long. Connor walked over and handed Darren a folder. Initial reviews done. 5 confirmed unauthorized off-site trips. 3 of them match guest complaints. 2 might require legal follow-up. Darren didn't flinch. Get the legal team ready. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Darren pulled Mason aside. You've been holding this place together with duct tape and grit. That ends now. You're getting a raise. And next week, we're sending someone to help you build a real schedule, not this patchwork nonsense. Mason swallowed hard. Appreciate it. But if I'm being honest, I stayed because I didn't think anyone would ever notice. That's what loyalty felt like. Quiet, Darren nodded. It doesn't have to stay that way. He walked back toward the hotel entrance, passing the valet stand where Lee was wiping down keys. Sienna was logging receipts and Kevon was laughing at something Mason said. For the first time in months, it looked like a team. By Tuesday morning, the valet team at the Houston hotel moved with a rhythm that hadn't existed before. It wasn't perfect, coverage was still tight, and breaks had to be staggered in awkward 5-minute windows, but the tone had shifted. People spoke more directly. No one flinched when a manager approached. And for the first time, the red vests looked like uniforms, not warning signs. Darren arrived just after 6, dressed in his usual pressed slacks and buttoned down, no longer hiding under the Doug alias. He didn't announce himself. He simply picked up a clipboard and started walking the lot with Mason. You sleep at all? Darren asked, glancing at Mason's unshaven face and the faint lines under his eyes. Few hours, Mason said. Spent most of last night drafting a new key tagging system. The old one's why 2 cars got mixed up last month. Darren nodded, impressed. Send it to me when it's done. We'll roll it out across all locations if it holds up. They reached the back corner of the lot, where several guest cars had been angled in a tighter layout than usual. Mason pointed to the compact row. That section's for high turnover guests, those at the hotel for under 2 hours, keeps the rotation tight. You figured that out on your own, after Carlos left, Mason said. He used to block those spots with long-stay vehicles. Said it was easier than thinking in circles. Darren didn't respond. He didn't need to. The contrast was already obvious. They returned to the stand just as Sienna handed off keys to a middle-aged man in a charcoal suit. She gave a quick nod and turned back to the log sheet. Darren waited until the guest drove off. She's sharp, he said quietly. Fastest handoff times in the team, Mason said, and she caught a misfiled tag yesterday before it became a problem. She want more responsibility. She hasn't said anything. But she doesn't miss much. Darren stepped forward. Sienna, she turned, surprised. Yes, sir. Starting next week, we're giving you shift coordinator status. You'll handle the guest-facing side during peak hours, check-ins, documentation, special requests. Mason handles back-end logistics, Sienna blinked. Really, you've earned it, she paused. Thanks, I didn't think anyone noticed, Darren met her eyes. That's the problem. That stops here. Before she could reply, Connor approached from the hotel lobby carrying a folder and a neutral expression. We've finished the internal review, he said. Want to go over it inside? Darren turned to Mason. You've got the stand. Mason gave a short nod. Inside the small office behind the hotel's kitchen, Darren closed the door and sat across from Connor. Give it to me straight. Connor opened the folder. We verified 5 cases of unauthorized vehicle use by Carlos. 3 involved high-end sports cars. 1 guest returned early and noticed the odometer discrepancy. That resulted in a formal complaint which was buried by a former district manager who's no longer with us. Names, already in the report. We've sent it to legal. As for staff conduct, Sienna and Ali both gave consistent reports of verbal discrimination. We found similar patterns in statements from two former valets who left within the last year. Why didn't this surface earlier? Carlos had a reputation for retaliating. Cutting hours, assigning bad shifts, discrediting people to HR, no one wanted to risk it. Darren exhaled slowly. How deep does this go? Connor held up another page. Not systemic, just ignored for too long. The majority of your supervisors are clean. This was an outlier, but a dangerous one. Darren stood and walked to the window. The valet drive was visible through the alleyway. He could see Mason directing Kevon toward the garage entrance, gesturing with his hands in a way that made it clear he'd repeated the same phrase more than once. What would have happened if I hadn't come down here myself? Darren asked. Connor didn't answer. I'll tell you, Darren continued. We'd have lost a client over a scratched Aston Martin, or had someone file a civil suit over discrimination. Or worse, someone could have been hurt. Connor placed the folder on the desk. What do you want to do going forward? New protocol, Darren said. Every supervisor gets a quarterly review, not just operational behavioral. I want staff surveys reviewed by someone with no direct reporting lines. Done. And I want all 7 locations audited within the next 30 days, quietly, no warnings. I'll coordinate it. Darren turned back to the desk. What about legal exposure? We're drafting settlement offers for the guests affected. As for Carlos, he violated company policy on at least 9 documented counts. His termination is airtight. Darren nodded. I want his file sealed and flagged. If he tries to get hired under another name, I want a system that catches it. We've already implemented the red flag. Darren opened the door and stepped into the hallway. I'll be at the stand. Back outside, the team was mid-shift. The drive was backed up again, but the energy was focused. Sienna was helping a guest with a stroller, guiding her to the front steps while another valet retrieved the family's SUV. Mason was on the radio, coordinating with the overflow lot. Darren spotted Kevon wiping down a guest's hood with a microfiber cloth. His pace was slow, deliberate. You always that careful? Darren asked as he approached. Kevon looked up, startled. Yes, sir. My uncle's a mechanic, taught me how to clean without scratching paint, said it's all in the wrist. You want to stay on this team? Kevon hesitated. Yeah, I need to pick up more hours. I'm short on rent this month. Darren reached into his pocket and handed him a prepaid meal card. We've partnered with the hotel kitchen. Staff meals are comped up to $25 a day starting tomorrow. No paperwork needed. Kevon blinked. Seriously? You can't park a $250,000 car on an empty stomach. Darren walked back to the stand. Mason glanced at him. You're changing a lot in a short time. I'm correcting what should have been done years ago. Mason adjusted the radio on his belt. You sticking around after today? Not undercover, Darren said, but I'll be back, regularly. A black Bentley pulled into the drive and Mason waved it forward. I'll take this one, Darren said, stepping around him. You sure? It's been a while. I want to remember what it feels like. Darren took the keys with a polite nod to the guest, slid behind the wheel and eased the car into motion. The engine was smooth, the steering tight. As he turned into the garage, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Control, not just over the wheel, but over the direction of his company. When he returned, Mason had already logged the ticket. Sienna handed off another set of keys. The line was moving. Darren stepped back and watched for a moment longer. The red vests blurred in motion, but they moved with purpose now, without fear. It wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was honest, and that finally was enough.